"Mom, that's the man from my dream," the little girl said at the cafe, and the CEO Millionaire froze. The golden glow of an early autumn morning poured through the tall windows of Clay and Kindred, casting warm light across shelves of handmade mugs and spinning wheels coated in dried clay. The gentle hum of conversation blended with the hiss of the espresso machine and the faint clink of tools from the pottery side of the cafe. Amelia, 28, moved behind the counter with practiced ease. Her light blonde hair, tied in a half-up style, swayed as she poured steamed milk into a ceramic cup she had crafted herself. Her apron was dusted with floury clay near the hem, a quiet badge of her dual life, barista and pottery guide. At the children's corner, her daughter Clara, just 4 years old, twirled in a pink dress, giggling softly as she sorted through brushes and unfinished pieces. Clara was quiet by nature, observant, the kind of child who saw more than she should. The bell above the door jingled. Amelia looked up out of habit, smiling at the newcomer. The smile faltered. A man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a charcoal coat that somehow made him seem more distant than the October air outside. His eyes, a gray blue so deep they seemed like dusk trapped in daylight, scanned the room. Julian. Or rather, the Julian. She recognized him instantly. Once splashed across business magazines, science journals, even late-night interviews, now a ghost from a former world. No one had seen him in years. It was said he had vanished. And yet here he was, standing in her cafe. Before Amelia could say a word, Clara turned, looked up, and pointed. "Mom, that's the man from my dream," she said in a small, certain voice. "I saw you hugging him, in a room full of smoke." The cafe noise didn't stop. No dishes shattered. No dramatic gasp filled the air. But in Amelia's chest, the world dropped. Julian's hand trembled, just slightly. The cup of coffee he had picked up slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, brown liquid fanning across the tiles like a fast-fading memory. I'm sorry," he said quickly, voice tight. "I didn't." He looked at Clara, then at Amelia. His eyes lingered on her. Not in recognition, not fully, but something pulled at him. Something just beyond the edge of knowing. Without another word, he turned and left, not rushing, but not slow, as though afraid if he stayed, something would rise that he was not ready to face. Amelia stood frozen behind the counter, steam curling around her like fog. She set down the milk jug. Her hand trembled faintly. Clara, still watching the door, turned to her mother. "What did you see, Clara?" Amelia whispered. Clara, unfazed, replied simply, "You were crying." He didn't turn around. Amelia sat down slowly on the wooden stool behind the counter, eyes fixed on the door he had left through. Outside, the trees rustled, a few golden leaves dancing past the glass. She reached up and absently tied her hair tighter, the motion precise, a habit long buried. One Julian used to love. Elsewhere, Julian sat inside his car, parked 2 blocks away, engine off. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The man staring back was older than he remembered being, his face sharper, hollowed, his eyes haunted. He opened the glove box and pulled out a small ceramic music box, cracked at the edge, the glaze chipped. He turned the little handle. Nothing. No sound. Still. The face of the little girl. Her eyes. Her voice. The woman behind the counter. That face. He looked down at his hand, still wet with spilled coffee. The tremor had not stopped, and something in her eyes, the mother, was clawing at something buried deep in his chest. He stared ahead, breath caught in the silence of the car. Something was breaking loose inside him. And it had begun with a child's voice. 5 years earlier. Vienna, Austria. The city was a mosaic of cobbled streets and golden rooftops, where old-world charm met modern rhythm. In a tiny apartment tucked above a bakery, Julian found the only place that had ever felt like home. He was 28 then, brilliant and restless, a young CEO spearheading a revolutionary biotech firm in the U.S., sent to Europe for a transatlantic research collaboration. Every day he dealt with molecules and algorithms, with breakthroughs and deadlines. And then came Margot. She was standing in front of a pottery display at the Leopold Museum, turning a small ceramic bird in her hands like it was singing only to her. Blonde hair tied loosely, streaked with glaze stains, her fingers smudged with cobalt blue. A ceramic arts student from the States, spending her last semester abroad. She looked up at him and smiled. That smile unspooled everything. They collided over espresso and night walks, over late dinners and earlier mornings. She took him to muddy pottery workshops. He brought her to silent science lectures. They laughed, always. They argued about music. She believed in ghosts. He believed in entropy. Somehow, it worked. Julian moved into her tiny apartment after 3 weeks. Just for the convenience, he claimed. Margot had simply nodded, hiding a grin. He remembered the night she first tried to teach him how to throw clay on a wheel. His hands were stiff, precise, too cautious. The clay buckled, wobbled, then flopped off center like a sad mushroom. Margot laughed so hard she cried, and Julian, covered in gray slip, felt more alive than he had in years. They had a promise. "When this project is over," Margot said one night, her cheek on his chest, "we'll leave Vienna, go somewhere sunny. I want a garden." "And a kiln," Julian added. "And a dog that hates you, but loves me." He had nodded. Deal. She made him a gift near the end, a music box, sculpted from clay. The glaze was a dusky blue, flecked with gold, and inside she'd etched his initials alongside hers. The melody, a faint, crackly version of the Blue Danube, played when he turned the handle. He had said it was the most beautiful thing he owned. She told him not to drop it, but then, the fire. Julian was in the lab. A test reactor malfunctioned, sirens, a flash, and then nothing. He woke up 3 days later, hospital lights like interrogations. He could not remember the explosion, just the pain in his ribs, the ringing in his ears, the scar along his side, and the music box, cracked, silent, burned at the corner. They told him Margot had been nearby, waiting for him after her ceramics class, that she hadn't made it. No body, just paperwork. A death certificate signed with bureaucratic neatness. Julian didn't ask questions. He took the box and walked away. He resigned from the company, disappeared from the spotlight. Headlines speculated, "Young genius quits after tragedy, burnout or breakdown." He never answered, not even to himself. In the 5 years that followed, he never rebuilt the lab, never touched clay again, never stayed in one place too long. But he always kept the box, broken, silent, like a relic of a life that had gone up in smoke. And now, 5 years later, in a quiet pottery cafe in Oregon, a little girl with Margot's eyes had looked straight at him and said she dreamed of her mother hugging him in a room full of smoke. Julian leaned back in the motel chair, staring at the music box on the bedside table. He had tried again that night to turn the handle, still no sound. But something else stirred, a feeling that had long been buried with ash and time, something he was afraid to name. The next afternoon, the sky hung low with mist and silence. Through the foggy glass of clay and kindred, warm amber light spilled onto the sidewalk. Inside, the smell of wet clay and roasted coffee mingled like old memories trying to take shape again. Julian stepped in. He did not order coffee. He did not greet anyone. He simply stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the shelves lined with mugs and bowls in every stage of completion. Then, quietly, he walked toward the back table, rested his hand on a half-formed vase, and looked up. "I'd like to sign up for a pottery class," he said, voice low and steady. Amelia froze, mid-pour. Her hand held a cup of freshly glazed ceramic, still warm from the kiln. Steam spiraled up like breath held too long. She met his gaze, heart beating too fast, but her tone stayed even. "We've got one starting this afternoon," she said, "if you don't mind getting your hands dirty." Julian gave a small nod. It was the first real smile she'd seen on his face. Not wide, not bright, but real. Something cracked open in the room, like the air itself had been holding its breath. The class began. Julian found himself seated beside Clara, unintentionally, but he made no effort to move. The little girl gave him a curious glance and a lopsided grin, before turning back to the small mound of clay in front of her. Amelia stood at the head of the group, sleeves rolled up, fingers already wet. Her voice filled the space, calm, instructional, soothing. Center the clay. Let your palms guide it. Don't fight the spin, let it speak. Julian watched her hands, the way her wrists moved in subtle rhythm, how she pressed her thumbs just so. It was more than muscle memory, it was music. He had seen these hands before, in another city, in another life. The shape of her focus, the slight furrow in her brow, it was all Margot. He looked down at his own clay. It wobbled. Beside him, Clara let out a triumphant giggle. She had made a tiny, uneven cup and was now smearing a pale blue glaze over it with a brush too large for her hand. She began to hum softly, a strange, floating tune. Julian stiffened. The melody, uncertain, incomplete, was unmistakably the Blue Danube. He had not heard it in years. Not since the night the music box stopped playing. Not since the fire. He did not speak. His hands simply stilled on the clay, and his throat tightened. As the workshop wrapped up, Clara ran to the drying shelf, picked up her tiny glazed cup, and darted back toward Julian. "Here," she beamed. "This is for you. I saw you holding it in my dream." Julian knelt slightly, taking the cup from her small hands. "Thank you," he said, and smiled, genuinely. Her joy was contagious, even if her words sent a ripple down his spine. Dreams again. Smoke. Him. He held the cup all the way back to his motel, careful not to crush the uneven walls or smudge the glaze before it dried. That evening, alone in the dim yellow light of the room, he unwrapped it from the soft paper Clara had used. He placed it on the desk and sat before it for a long time. Then, slowly, he turned the cup under the light. And there it was. On the side of the tiny vessel, painted with deliberate care, was a drawing. Two figures, childlike but clear. A woman with blonde hair held a man in her arms, surrounded by smoke curling in waves. Julian's breath caught in his throat. It was not a random sketch. It was the moment, the final one. The embrace he and Margot had shared as the flames rose around them. He had never spoken of it, never described it to anyone. Yet Clara had drawn it. The cup slipped slightly in his fingers. He set it down before he dropped it, then collapsed back into the chair, staring. His hands covered his face. He breathed shallow. It was as if the past had reached across time, through a child's hand, and landed right in his palm. That same night, back at the cafe, Amelia moved through the now empty studio, wiping down wheels and sponging off dried clay. She noticed a sketch left behind on one of the tables, Clara's again. A pencil drawing of a man's face. The eyes were unfinished, but unmistakable. Amelia held the paper in both hands, her expression unreadable. Her fingers trembled, just slightly. She did not speak. Then, slowly, she tied her hair back into its usual half-up knot, the same way Margot once did whenever she needed to steady herself. She stared out the window at the soft fog rolling in. Her eyes were full of something she had no name for, not fear, not hope, just wait. She did not let herself wonder. Not yet, but the echo was growing louder. Rain drifted gently against the windows of clay and kindred, casting moving shadows on the worn wooden floor. The afternoon class had just begun. Julian sat at his usual spot, close enough to observe Clara but never intrusive. He had been attending the workshop regularly now, no longer a distant stranger, though still a man who kept his silences tucked into his sleeves. He asked no questions about the past. He molded clay. He spoke to Clara. He listened to Amelia's instructions without ever making her feel cornered. It was enough, for now, that he was simply there. Clara had been shaping a small figure with too much water and not enough patience. Her stool slipped just slightly as she leaned too far to one side. her small hands losing grip. In a blur, Julian caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her instinctively. His hands were still slick with clay, and the pale dust left a faint streak across the back of her pink dress. "Got you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The room fell quiet. A few students looked over, then quickly looked away. There was something in the way he held the child. Not just care, but familiarity. Clara leaned against him for a beat longer than she needed to, as if she recognized something invisible. Amelia watched from the other end of the room. She had seen many acts of kindness between strangers, but this was something else. She could not name it. She could only feel it, blooming in her chest like heat after cold. Julian carefully brushed some clay from Clara's forehead, fingers gentle, and then he froze. Just beneath the soft golden fringe of her bangs, near the hairline, was a small circular birthmark, perfectly round, faint but unmistakable. In that exact same place, he too had a birthmark, one he used to call his moonspot as a boy. He did not speak, but his hand hovered there for a second longer than necessary. His breath slowed, his eyes searched hers, not for answers, but for recognition. Clara smiled up at him, then ran back to her seat. Julian sat very still. The moment passed in the room, but not in his mind. That evening, he returned to his rented room, took off his coat, and discovered a few strands of Clara's hair clinging to the fabric. The birthmark, the eyes, the dream, the strange melody. He sent the sample to a private lab without writing a name. Days later, the results came back. Clara was his daughter. He read the report without blinking. He sat at the edge of the bed, the weight of 5 years collapsing quietly onto his shoulders. He did not cry. He did not shout. He simply placed the folder beside the old, broken music box and stared at both like they might eventually speak. The next day, he returned to clay and kindred. Amelia was behind the counter, organizing new glazes. Julian approached with slow steps, holding a folded piece of paper. "I'd like to buy one of the spare pottery wheels," he said. She raised an eyebrow, surprised. He managed a small smile. "I want to try making something that does not break." Amelia blinked, then nodded. She wrote up a receipt without asking anything more. As he turned to leave, her chest tightened, as if something essential had just walked out the door and she was not sure if she would see it again. In the following class, Julian returned to his usual seat. He worked quietly, hands steadier than before. He did not speak much. He molded a cup with a carefulness he had never shown in earlier sessions. A woman in her 60s, a longtime student at the studio, watched him for a while before leaning toward Amelia and whispering, "That man isn't just learning to shape clay. He's shaping something far more fragile." Amelia looked up. Julian was bent over the spinning wheel, entirely focused. His hands moved like he finally believed in what they could hold. She said nothing, but her eyes softened, and she didn't look away. The last customers had gone, and Clay and Kindred was quiet, bathed in the soft hum of amber pendant lights. The air still smelled faintly of coffee grounds and keyline dried clay. Amelia was wiping the counter, humming without thought, when the bell above the door jingled softly. She looked up. Julian stood there, his coat damp from the evening drizzle, a small object in his hand wrapped in an old linen cloth. He stepped forward slowly, as if unsure whether the space still welcomed him. He said nothing at first. Then, with careful hands, he placed the object on the counter between them and unwrapped it. A cracked music box made of pale ceramic. Amelia's breath caught. Her hands froze mid-wipe. Julian spoke, voice quiet, uncertain. "I've kept this for 5 years. It never played again. Could you fix it?" Amelia did not reach for it right away. Her eyes were locked on the faded painted motifs, hand-carved vines and tiny stars around the rim. Her own work. Her mark was at the bottom, a small indigo glaze pressed into the clay, shaped like a half-moon. She had placed it there for him, for love. Her fingers trembled as she opened the lid. With the movement, a jagged, uneven tune began to play. The Blue Danube. Warped, fractured, but unmistakable. She turned away, quickly wiping her eyes. The music felt like something breathing after too long underwater. Neither of them spoke while the tune stuttered through its broken lullaby. The space around them thickened with things unsaid. Julian finally broke the silence. "Margot," his voice cracked. "It's you, isn't it?" Amelia did not deny it. She only nodded, her eyes shining with a sudden, quiet exhaustion. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I thought you burned with that lab." Julian stepped back slightly, stunned, but not angry, just stunned. "You survived?" She nodded again. "I was pulled out by a rescue crew. No one could identify me. Everything was chaos. I was in the hospital for weeks. By the time I could walk again, I found out I was pregnant, and you were gone. They said you might not make it, that there was no trace." Julian stared down at the music box. His jaw tightened. "I woke up in a hospital, across the city. Burned, broken. Everyone told me you died in the fire. I didn't question it." There was a long pause. Amelia spoke first. "I became Amelia because Margot felt buried in Vienna. I came back here. I wanted something small, something I could control, and I raised Clara." Julian blinked slowly. "She's mine, isn't she?" Amelia did not look away. "Yes." He exhaled, like the truth had knocked the wind from his lungs, but there was no fury in him, only sadness, regret. "I gave up everything," he murmured. "The company, the research, none of it mattered without you. I disappeared because I thought I had already lost the only thing worth being found for." Amelia's fingers gripped the edge of the counter. Julian looked at her, really looked. "Why didn't you try to find me?" he asked softly. She swallowed hard. "Because I was someone else. Because I thought you were gone. Because I didn't want to chase a ghost through Europe with a newborn in my arms." Silence stretched again. "Because I chose Clara," she finished. "I chose peace, and I wasn't sure Margot would bring her that." Julian nodded, slowly. They stood there for a moment longer, the broken waltz playing its last off-key notes in the space between them. No shouts, no accusations, just the fragile quiet of two people realizing they had survived something together, and separately. Rain fell soft and steady over the town, turning streets into shimmering ribbons. The windows of Clay and Kindred remained dark for the third evening in a row. Julian had vanished. He did not return to the pottery class. He did not text. He did not call. Amelia tried to tell herself it was expected. People leave all the time. But the air inside the house felt different, like something had been gently removed and not returned. She kept busy, mostly for Clara's sake. But even Clara had changed. The little girl, usually quick with stories and questions, had grown unusually quiet. She no longer hummed while coloring, no longer dragged her tiny chair next to Amelia at the counter. On the third night, Clara ran a low fever. Amelia sat beside her on the bed, stroking the child's warm forehead, whispering soft songs. Rain tapped gently on the roof. Clara stirred in her half-sleep and murmured, voice small and thick with drowsiness, "Daddy doesn't come inside anymore. You didn't call him back. We're still stuck in the smoke." Amelia froze. She had never told Clara about the fire, not once, not even in pieces. Her heart clenched. She looked down at her daughter, whose face was flushed and damp with sweat, tangled in dreams not her own. And in that moment, Amelia saw it, her own old fear, wearing Clara's expression. The same ache, the same confusion she had lived with all those years ago. Unspoken, unanswered, unresolved. She could not let Clara inherit that silence. The next day, with the sky still dripping and gray, Amelia walked to Julian's place. She carried nothing but the music box, now repaired, its glaze refired, cracks nearly invisible. The winding key worked again. She stood under the small awning by his door, rain clinging to her coat and lashes. When the door opened, Julian looked tired, not surprised, not angry. Just like he had been waiting. She said nothing for a moment, then extended the box toward him. "I fixed it," she said. "It plays again." He looked down at it in her hands, and then, up at her. She did not cry. She did not ask where he had been. Her voice was calm. "You're not the only one trying to fix something broken." Julian did not reply. He simply stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The rain misted around them, catching in the folds of their coats and the edges of their hair. They stood there quiet, unhurried, together. Neither one said they were sorry. Neither one needed to. In the soft hush of Oregon rain, they chose each other again, not out of guilt or memory, not even out of obligation to Clara. They chose each other because neither one could keep running from who they had become, and this time there was no smoke. Only the sound of the repaired music box, playing, slowly, in the space between them. The sunlight slanted gently through the windows of Clay and Kindred, dusting the shelves with a warm amber glow. The storm had passed. The town seemed to exhale, and so did the people in it. Julian returned. Not like before, there was no hesitation in his step, no shadows clinging to his shoulders. This time, he came with intention. Under one arm, he carried a rolled-up sketch. In his other hand, a small box of tools. He took his place at the far wheel, greeted Clara with a soft smile, nodded once at Amelia behind the counter. She nodded back, calm as ever, but something flickered in her eyes. Julian spread out the paper carefully. It was a design. A cup. Simple in shape, but detailed in thought. Elegant lines, subtle curves, measurements precise. This was no beginner's project. This was something else. He got to work. The wheel spun under his hands, steady and clean. His fingers moved slowly at first, cautious, then with quiet confidence, smoothing, shaping, carving. He didn't rush. Each press of his palm seemed to smooth something deeper than clay. Around him the workshop carried on, chatter, laughter, the occasional hum of Clara's little voice. But Julian stayed focused. His world had narrowed to the weight and feel of what he was building. Hours passed. The piece took form. It was a cup, yes, but more than that. It was balanced, whole. It held something unseen. When he finished, he turned it gently upside down. With a fine-tip tool, he etched a sentence beneath the base. "This time, I won't drop it." The glaze was soft white, with a faint swirl of blue near the rim, like a sky just after rain. He let it dry, then wrapped it carefully in a sheet of ivory tissue paper. He tied it with twine and placed it on the counter, just in front of Amelia, who had been watching quietly from her place behind the espresso machine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Amelia looked at the package, then at Julian. Her hands paused only briefly before untying the string. She peeled back the paper and lifted the cup. The base caught her eye first. The words. She said nothing. Instead, she reached behind her, poured a fresh shot of espresso, and let the dark liquid fill the new cup. The scent curled between them. She set the cup down, not across the counter, but on the ledge next to her. Julian stepped forward and picked it up. Their eyes met, no fanfare, no declaration, just quiet recognition. This wasn't a grand gesture. This was a promise made from clay and time and hands that had once broken things, now learning how to hold. There was no toast, no speech, just a cup of coffee, warm and full, no longer searching for its place. This time, he would not let it fall. A month later, Clay and Kindred buzzed with the warmth of conversation and the clink of ceramic. Outside, Oregon's winter light slanted through the front windows, casting soft shadows over rows of pottery and polished wood. It was the cafe's year-end ceramics exhibition, and for once, even the regulars looked slightly more polished, scarves neatly knotted, boots wiped clean of mud. Guests wandered between displays. Each piece had a small card, artist name, title, a short note. Near the front, on a low table just within Clara's reach, sat a little clay cat with an oversized grin and crooked tail. The card read, "Dirt Kitty," by Clara. He guards snacks. The piece made people smile. Clara, in her pink dress, brighter now with a ribbon around the waist, skipped proudly from table to table, occasionally stopping to adjust the cat's tail like it might come alive and twitch. Nearby, Julian's cup stood beneath a clean, focused spotlight. Simple, elegant, weighty. On the card, "I won't drop it, Julian R." No artist's bio, no explanation. It didn't need one. Not far from it sat Amelia's display, the old music box, lovingly restored. The glaze bore cracks beneath the surface, preserved like veins in porcelain, beautiful because of its scars. The note beside it read, "Fixed by hand, still sings." The room carried a hum of music, chatter, the low rumble of the espresso machine. But then, in a quieter moment, perhaps between songs, perhaps between sentences, the music box began to play. Soft at first, then clear. The first few measures of Blue Danube Waltz drifted out, full and unbroken, for the first time in 5 years. People paused. Some turned their heads toward the sound, unsure where it was coming from. But at the far end of the room, near the window seat where the afternoon light touched the floor like watercolor, the three of them sat together. Julian held his coffee in the white and blue cup. Amelia's hand rested over his. Clara climbed onto the bench beside them and leaned into her mother's side, one hand still dusty from sneaking a snack near the clay station. No one posed. But someone, maybe one of the students, maybe a guest, lifted a camera and took a photo. The shutter clicked, just once. In the frame, 3 people. A man, a woman, a child. On the table before them, a steaming cup of coffee, a vase holding 3 wildflowers, one crooked, one straight, one still opening. And the music box, lid open, song spinning out into the golden light. Julian didn't speak, neither did Amelia. But as Clara reached up to touch the rim of her father's cup, she smiled like she knew exactly what it meant. Not every fracture needs to be hidden. Not every piece that breaks is ruined. And sometimes, just sometimes, what was once shattered can become the most unshakable thing in the room. If that story stirred something in you, like a song long forgotten or a memory hidden in clay, don't let it fade just yet. Hit that hype button to show your love, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales that dig deep, speak soft, and stay with you long after the final note. Let's keep crafting stories that don't just entertain, but mend, remind, and resonate. See you in the next one.